I run the incredible YouthBuild Philadelphia Charter School. We enroll each year 200 young people who've previously dropped out of high school. And every kind of name is used to describe our students. We get a lot of disengaged, disconnected, hardest to serve, at-risk youth. Only very recently have people begun to use the term opportunity youth, which I have to say I love, because to me this really does represent the true potential that our opportunity youth present as we go through to becoming this new workshop of the world. So students at YouthBuild spend half their time in competency-based academics, and the other half of their time contributing to the community in really deep and meaningful ways. So for example, a whole bunch of our students are in a construction track, and they rebuild abandoned houses in the city for sale to first-time low-income communities and earn an industry-recognized credential at the same time. Through all of this, they are surrounded, even cocooned a little bit, by a fabulous staff who are really, really committed to their success, right? And at the end of it, when they graduate, they have a high school diploma, an industry-recognized credential, a national service award used towards post-secondary education, and hopefully, and very often, an entirely new perspective on their own potential, right? Yes. And, you know, I will give you the description of what could happen in any given week that I have spent with YouthBuild over these past 18 years. So Monday morning, I get to work, and of course the first thing I do is check Facebook. I see a post from Zarel about the joys of mentoring 12-year-old boys at the YMCA where he is interning as he goes to Temple. And it makes me want to laugh, because when he was with us, he resisted the leadership development because he said he was too quiet. And he is, but he's also a leader. Then I walk out and I run into Don Pinkney, who's our director of construction. And he tells me that the latest house that our students rebuilt just got LEED Platinum certification. That's right. And it has just been sold, he tells me, to a first-time low-income homeowner, and they will be the 84th family in Philadelphia to own this labor of YouthBuild love. So I go out then, and I overhear a conversation between our development director and her mentee, Rudy, and he's talking about his turning point at YouthBuild, the first time that someone looked past his 6'5" frame and his tattoos and called him sweet. Because he is. Yes, my life is filled with awe moments, right? Then I walk into a service planning meeting, and the students are absolutely determined that they will repaint an entire elementary school, all 3 floors, plus put in 28 murals so the little dudes feel inspired in one day. One day, right? And 2 weeks later, on Martin Luther King Day, we do. Then I go down to City Hall to a Department of Health and Human Services meeting, one of those policy meetings, and I run into Marquita, class of 2008. She was abandoned in the worst kind of violence. She came through foster care. Even at YouthBuild, she was a bit of a problem child, and she'll admit it. But she's graduated from college now, and she's a social worker because she wants to make a difference, and she will. And then I get an email in my inbox, and it's from our director of case management. And she says she really, really needs my help because there is a student who's been in a temporary shelter for far too long, and she needs to find a permanent home. And 2 seconds later, I get another email from our service coordinator who is shouting out a student for volunteering, going above and beyond, showing up on a Saturday for 8 hours to plant trees outside people's homes. And I jolt when I realize that the name in the 2 emails is the same. She's homeless, like 20 to 25% of our students are each year, but she showed up on a Saturday to plant trees outside someone's home, and it happens more than you can imagine. And then I go past our tech crew, and they invite me to a weekend-long web slam that they are having. It's on Nerd Street, they tell me proudly. And it is, and they are nerds. So, and you're probably wondering at this point why no one told me to cut down these examples. They did. But I resisted, because this is really good data. And just this year, we had a student who won a National Service Award, the Mayor's Award for Service, for the work that she did at a shelter that she had been at when she was 4. We had students who got recognized by the Preservation Alliance. They will be winning an award this year because they restored John Coltrane's house in Strawberry Mansion. And, whoa, yes, and we have students who have been maintaining the solar roofs on the Crane Arts building. So they are everywhere, and hopefully you will see, after all of these speakers, that our students have been everywhere in all these places that everyone's been talking about. But it's incredible, and it's important to tell these data points, because the stereotype runs so deep. Usually, when I tell people what I do in my work, they say, "Oh, it's gotta be a tough job." And I want to be like, no, don't feel sorry for me. I get hugged at work every day, right? But the stereotypes, they're pretty deep and they persist. And I think partly they persist because we've been taught, in some ways, to think in terms of return on investment and lowest common denominator, and let's reach for the lowest hanging fruit, right? So invest in early childhood education, because at least there you get to see the needle move pretty quickly. And don't get me wrong, I am a deep believer in an investment in early childhood education, and I am such a fan of the things that are happening across the city on that front. But in a city where nearly 40% of 9th graders are not graduating 4 years later, to not also invest in these highest hanging fruit means that we are just willing to give up on an entire chunk of an entire generation. And at YouthBuild, we are not. And we are consumed, in fact, with harnessing the potential of that 40%, because in our opinion, they are not part of the problem, they are the problem solvers. And this belief, right, along with 2 core strategies for us, allows us to do all kinds of things. So the first one is that we are unapologetically comprehensive. By now, you're probably recognizing we're unapologetically a lot of things, but we are unapologetically comprehensive, okay? So what this means is that even in a world that is getting segmented and thinking small, we refuse to think of our students in any other way but as whole human beings. And so, if they have multi-system problems, we have multi-system solutions, and we will stretch, bend, and do whatever we have to do to treat them in that way. The second thing is that we are not afraid to use the word love in the context of our students and mean it. Yes! Our students love us, and we love them, and that makes us relentless, right? And so let me give you an example of what these things, this unapologetic comprehensiveness and relentless love, does when you try and sort of interface and do new things and innovate around students. So a few years ago, we became really concerned that while our students were sort of happily going on to post-secondary education places, and I mean the full spectrum of them, that they were not, in fact, completing those credentials. They weren't succeeding in those environments. And so we started to say, you know what? For us, it is not enough to just sort of hand them a high school diploma. These are the students we love. We want to see them succeed after they leave. And so, we decided, and here's another thing that we were really worried about, actually, that, we didn't want our students to start thinking that their not succeeding in those spaces was in any way related to their worthiness. Because as far as we're concerned, our students are worthy and belong any place they want to belong. And we were really afraid that they would start to believe that maybe they didn't belong in those college and other environments. So at first, we took the traditional approach. I called college presidents, and I went to a lot of networking events where I thought they would be. And that led to failure, and fortunately, it was right before a restraining order, because there is a fine line between relentlessness and stalking. So then we said, we're going to do some guerrilla partnershiping. We just send someone to the campus. That's where our graduates were. That's where we needed to be. So literally, staff would show up, be like, it's a public campus. You can hang in the library, you can be in the corridors, and you can serve our graduates, right? And so after a while of this guerrilla partnershiping, the colleges began to take notice. Because what else are you going to do with someone who is perpetually hanging out in your corridor and happens to be serving your students, right? Because at this point, they're their students. And so they began to engage with us. But at first, we still ran into some of this system to system, you know, the stuff, the sentences that begin, we want to, but, and so we got some, we want to work with you and your students, but they're not college ready. And so we said, can you define what college ready means? And we can adapt our curriculum and make sure they are. And we did. And then they said, we want to, but our calendar is not aligned with your calendar, so we can't really do dual enrollment and bridge programming and some of these other things. And we said, you know what? We can change our calendar. And we did. And so now we operate on a quarterly system and go year-round, because it makes much more sense that we would calibrate according to a system that our students want to go into, rather than be wedded to something that failed our students, right? So we recalibrated, changed our calendar. So a few things happened after the colleges figured out how relentless we were and how determined we were to hang in there. So one is, clearly they figure out we're relentless, and you know, they give up a little. They're like, fine. The second thing that happens is that they realize that we were actually not in it to blame or shame anyone. And you know, I'm standing up here, and for comedic drama, you know, I'm sort of making it sound like this, but they have some pretty tough realities too, and we understood that. So when we went in there, we also talked about, look, how can we be helpful? We get it. We get that there is misalignment. How do we do this together? And the third thing is that they fell in love with our students too, because that happens. You hang out with YouthBuild students for a while, and you will be in love with them too. And so then they began to do things and tell us, like, can you import some of your climate culture, and let's do shout-outs on our campus too, because it feels good, and it does, right? So we started to go there. And essentially, this partnership has meant that we've been able to extend our support, our program, essentially, for a whole year after graduation, with not just intangible supports, but also some tangible supports, like monthly transpasses for all graduates who are enrolled in any kind of post-secondary education, like need-based grants. Because as it turns out, that is often the difference between stopping out of college or persisting in there, right? And so we managed to do these things. So what this has meant is that last summer, 107 of our students spent time in these deep bridges, right? Figuring out how to get to the next place with 4 technical schools, 4 area colleges, and 2 union apprenticeship programs. And then, of course, we said, you know what? If 107 can do it, and they, you know, it really benefited them, everybody should do it. So now it's a graduation requirement. And suddenly, we are much more aligned, right? So I'm an immigrant to this city. I chose to move here. And it's funny, actually, because I came here kind of by accident, and it was one of the 5 places that my father said I absolutely could not live in. So, of course, here's where I am. And it's funny, actually, because he comes to visit me every year now, and he loves it, and he keeps trying to take credit for the idea that he sent me here. But I love it Because, and hopefully you've heard that in the theme today, this sense of connectedness. And I know that usually people talk about us being a city of neighborhoods when they're trying to be slightly nasty and imply that we're overly parochial, but I don't think so. I think that this is our strength. We can connect, right? And so most weeks at YouthBuild, as you've heard, just reinforce that sense of connectedness and that idea. But I will say that there are also weeks at YouthBuild that just point out the chasms that exist between systems and between neighborhoods. Because some weeks also start like this. Monday morning, I hear that a young person has been shot, and I jolt and I worry because I think that it's one of ours. And it isn't. But I'm sad anyway because really it is. And then Tuesday, I run into a graduate on the subway, and he's really down because he's afraid that no employer is ever going to look past his record. And I am afraid that they will never get to see that his record also includes accolades for perseverance and for kindness. And then I get an email from our director of case management saying, help, please, 4 students have not been coming to school because their childcare subsidies haven't kicked in yet. And I'm completely powerless to do anything about it. And on and on and on. And Friday, I go down to a workforce meeting, and I listen to an employer there talking about these kids these days. They have no values, and they wear their pants too low. And they wear their pants too low, on and on about their pants. And I want to scream some days, because we've heard it, right? That's why we're laughing. We've all heard this. But I want to scream some days and say, really? Is this really about young people wearing their pants too low? Because that just seems like an oversimplification that we can't afford. We can't afford it. Because to just focus on that means that we would be missing out on all of this incredible potential, right? And so, what I want to say to everyone, and I know that, I'm standing up here, and, it is fully sort of it's TEDx, and I could sound like I'm preaching at everybody and that I have all the answers. But I do not have all the answers. I don't. What I do have are these wonderful bits of data that we really should start believing and listening to. Because, yes, we really need for us to get into this idea that this is not just an education issue. It is, if we are preparing, and we've heard this again as a theme, if we are preparing young people and we want them to work in these incredibly complicated and complex workplaces and spaces of the future, wouldn't it be great if their education and their preparation was happening in this same exquisitely contextualized, complicated, and connected way? So why don't we do that? Let's all decide to recalibrate, because there are multiple systems right now that are all recovering from the boom and the slump of the industrialization of the last century. There's so many of us that need to recalibrate. Let's do it around people, young people. And let's not forget that 40% as we recalibrate, right? Because in this city, right, we already know that high school dropouts are painting entire elementary schools, right? Homeless mothers are showing up to plant trees in front of somebody else's home, right? Young people who know hunger are going and volunteering at food banks. And former foster care children are becoming social workers so that they can change the system. It's such a great time for us to become engaged. Let's have employers, unions, everybody get engaged. Because it wouldn't be good if employers were not just worried about internships, but actually started worrying about how many of those internships turn into long-term, life-changing opportunities. Wouldn't it be wonderful if colleges stopped believing that the education gap was not about, some artificial deadline past which you cannot learn? Wouldn't it be great if all of us sort of got in the mix and muddied up those lines and said, we are going to be about what makes sense for young people, not just about what we are allowed or not allowed to do. So let's pick this time to draw our inspiration from these young people and start to reach for those highest hanging fruit. Let's all be unapologetically comprehensive. Let's all be relentlessly loving, because those highest hanging fruit, they just might be the sweetest. Thank you.